My son changed the locks while I was at my wife's funeral and left a note that said, "This property is in my name now." I smiled and called one person. The day I buried my wife of 40 years, I came home to find a note on the ground in front of my own front door. It was written in my son's handwriting. I read it once, folded it in half, put it in my breast pocket, and felt something inside me go very, very quiet. Welcome to Revenge Stories. Drop a comment and make sure to subscribe. You are going to love it here. My name is Augustus Bard. I am 65 years old. I spent 31 years as a quantity surveyor in Peterborough, Ontario. And if you do not know what a quantity surveyor does, I will tell you simply that I spent my career reading contracts, measuring what was actually built against what was promised, and telling people very calmly when the numbers did not match. I retired 4 years ago. I grow tomatoes in the backyard that my wife Miriam used to say looked better than they tasted. I will not confirm or deny that. She is not here to argue the point anymore, and I still have to eat them. Before I tell you what I did next, tell me where you are watching this from. I would love to know. Miriam and I met when I was 24 and she was 23. We married a year later. She was a school librarian for 27 years. She had opinions about everything. The right way to fold a fitted sheet, whether the word utilized should be allowed to exist, and the correct amount of time a person should spend on a phone call, the correct amount, according to Miriam, was never more than 4 minutes unless something was on fire. I always thought that was reasonable. She died in February after 14 months with pancreatic cancer. She was 64 years old. She was the funniest person I have ever known. And I am still not sure the world has fully adjusted to her absence. Our son, Derek, is 38. He works as a civil estimator for a mid-sized construction firm out of Barrie. He knows contracts. He knows documents. He knows exactly what language means and what it does not mean. And he knows the difference between a legal claim and a piece of paper with words on it. I want you to hold that in mind. Derek moved to Barrie 11 years ago. When he married a woman named Cassandra, she is not in this story. She left him 3 years back, and I am not going to say anything about that. What I will say is that after she left, Derek started calling me more often. And the calls had a particular texture to them. He would ask about the house, how much I thought it was worth now, whether I had looked into downsizing, whether I had spoken to anyone about what happens to the property eventually. The first few times, I answered him plainly because I thought he was just a son asking reasonable questions. By the 4th or 5th time, I started answering him the way I answered contractors who were trying to get me to agree to something I had not fully read yet. Carefully and without committing to anything, he came to visit in October, about 4 months before Miriam passed. He walked through the house in a way I noticed but did not remark on. He went from room to room. Slowly, he paused in the hallway looking at the wall like he was measuring it. I am a quantity surveyor. I know what measuring looks like. I went back to my chair and picked up my book. That evening, he brought up the property again. He mentioned something called a life estate. He mentioned his name being on the title as a protective measure. He said he had been talking to someone about it. I asked him who. He said just a guy he knew. I put my book down and said, "Derek, the house is mine. The title is mine. Your mother and I will decide what happens to it when we decide. And that conversation is finished for tonight." He nodded. He ate his dinner. He left the next morning. I did not think much more about it until the day I came home from burying his mother. The service was at St. John's Anglican at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday in February. 47 people came. That sounds like a small number, and it was not. Every one of those 47 people loved Miriam specifically, not just in the way people love the deceased out of courtesy. Her sister flew in from Halifax. 3 of her former students came. One of them cried harder than anyone, and she was 32 years old and hadn't seen Miriam since she was 15. That tells you what you need to know. I got home at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I was still in my funeral clothes. My neighbor Bernard had offered to drive me, and I told him I preferred to walk. It is 11 minutes from the church. I have walked it 1,000 times before. That day I walked slowly. I put my key in the front door and it did not turn. I tried it again. I looked at the key. I looked at the lock. There was a new lock on the door, a different make entirely, a Schlag deadbolt where there had been a quick set that morning. I stood there for a moment and then I looked down and there was a folded piece of paper on the ground in front of the door. I picked it up. It said, "Dad, I have had legal advice. This property is now in my name. Please call me so we can discuss the transition. Do not make this harder than it needs to be." Derek, I read it once. I folded it back in half. I put it in my breast pocket next to a photograph of Miriam I had been carrying since the morning. And then I called Martin Feld. Martin is 66. We met on a job site in 1989 and we have been friends for 37 years. He is a retired structural engineer and the most practically minded human being I have ever encountered, he answered on the second ring the way he always does. I said, Martin, I need you to come to my house, he said. I am already in my car. I said, I am standing on my front porch in my funeral clothes and there is a new lock on the door. He said, nothing for 2 seconds, then he said, is Derek alive? I said, as far as I know. He said, all right, then, I will be there in 12 minutes. He arrived in 11. He stood beside me and I handed him the note. He read it once. He handed it back. He said, Augustus, this is not a legal document. This is a man who works in construction, writing words on paper and hoping you are too tired and too sad to check. I said, I know. He said, so, who are you calling? I said, Patricia Shum. He said, good, call her now while I stand here and look unfriendly in the direction of the street. Patricia Shum has been my property lawyer for 19 years. She is 57 years old and in all the time I have known her, she has never once raised her voice and never once lost. She answered on the third ring. And I told her exactly what I was looking at. She said, give me 4 minutes. I gave her 4 minutes. She called back and said, Augustus, the title to that property has not moved. Your name is the only name on it. It has been your name only since Miriam's passing 3 weeks ago when her share transferred to you. Exactly as your joint tenant specified. She said, Derek has filed nothing, registered nothing, and has no legal standing to that property whatsoever. She said that note is a piece of paper with words on it. Then she said, I am going to need you to file a formal complaint with the Land Registry Office today, and I am going to do several other things on your behalf this afternoon. Do not go anywhere. A court-authorized locksmith arrived at my door at 4:47 that afternoon. By 5:15, I was inside my own house, my keys worked, and Derek's lock was sitting in a paper bag on my kitchen counter. Patricia had arranged a trespass notice to be served to Derek by 6 o'clock that evening, which meant that if he set foot on my property again without my written permission, he would be arrested. A formal fraud report was filed with the Land Registry flagging his attempted title claim, which created a permanent record of the attempt. Patricia also called me at 7:30 that evening to tell me that attempting to fraudulently claim property ownership in Ontario is a criminal matter and that the police file was open. Martin stayed until 9 o'clock. We ate soup that Bernard's wife had left on the porch in a pot with a note that said nothing except eat this. We did not talk about Derek much. We talked about Miriam for about an hour. Martin told a story about a dinner party she threw in 1994 where she served a dessert she had made herself and it was, in his words, structurally compromised in ways he had rarely encountered in 30 years of engineering. I told him she knew it, too. She served it anyway and dared anyone to say something. Nobody did. Martin said that was the most Miriam thing he had ever heard and he was right. The following week, I met with my estate lawyer, Gerald Owe. Gerald has the calm energy of someone who has heard every version of every story and is no longer surprised by any of them. We spent 2 hours restructuring every document in my name. The will was revised. A property trust was established. A power of attorney was updated with Martin named specifically. Every legal opening Derek had been quietly mapping for 2 years was closed and documented. Gerald looked over the finished paperwork and said, I think we have covered it. I said, I know we have covered it. He said, how do you know? I said, because I spent 31 years finding the gaps in what people build versus what they promised. And there are no gaps here. Derek did not call me for 6 weeks. When he finally did, I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that started with explanation and ended somewhere near what I think he intended as remorse. I listened to it once. I did not call back. The fraud flag at the Land Registry remains on permanent record. The police file remains open. Patricia tells me charges are unlikely given what was filed. But the record exists and Derek is aware. It exists, that is sufficient. 8 months later, Derek wrote me a letter, a real one, handwritten. For pages, I am not going to tell you what was in it. That is between a father and a son. What I will say is that I have not made any decisions about what comes next. And I am not in a hurry to make them on a Saturday afternoon in late April. About 2 months after all of this, Martin came over and helped me put up a new fence along the back of the property. We had talked about it for 3 years. Miriam always said the old one looked tired. She was right. The old one did look tired. Martin handed me a post and said, how are you doing? I thought about it for a moment and said, I am okay, he said. Just okay, I said. Some days better than okay, he said. That is the right answer. We put in for posts and then we sat down on the back steps and drank coffee. And I looked at the garden and I thought about Miriam saying the tomatoes looked better than they tasted. I went inside and got my towel. I planted 3 new ones.